Hey folks, it's Ardwulf. Welcome. Today we are going to tackle a very challenging game to store. SPI, Jim Dunnigan, and Team's War in Europe. This is obviously a very large game. There's 3,600 counters and I think 7 maps. I have played this, but it's been about 25 years. It comes from SPI in a 4-inch box. Now, this did come, if you got the soapbox version, there was also a flat tray version. This did come with 3 SPI counter trays. And in principle, you can get the entire game into those 3 counter trays. In fact, when I got the game, this copy, by the way, is missing 1 counter. I believe it is missing 1 German air point. That's unfortunate, but I will sleep soundly this evening. The old SPI in-box counter trays are generally broadly very similar to the trays that we get from GMT nowadays. The compartments were a little bigger. There was less dead space around the rim, but they were a little more delicate and the lids did not stick on as well. However, that said, I have noticed that some of the recent batches of GMT counter trays, the lids don't stick on very well at all. So we're going to tackle 2 storage solution topics here today. One of which is 3D printed dividers, as you see in this GMT tray, to divide the compartments into individual subcompartments that you can then use as an organizing tool to organize your pieces. And we're also going to talk about the counter trays that are now being manufactured by the fine folks at Cube4Me in Poland. I ordered a big batch of these, kind of specifically to deal with my SPI soapbox games, because the old SPI inbox trays, I'm not talking about the big flats, we've already done a video about that. Those inbox trays are pretty unreliable. I've kind of got a bunch of extra ones now, and I'll still use them where the lids go on tightly, but sometimes they don't. So I'll talk about the Cube4Me trays in a little more detail in a few minutes. But we're also going to talk about these, and I might have to reframe these shots, these 3D printable dividers that I have designed and printed on my 3D printer for the Cube4Me trays. I also, as you can tell, have done so for the GMT trays. The models, incidentally, are available to patrons at the swordsman level and above. There is a link in the video description to the Ardwulf Lair Patreon. There is a file repository with a large number of different kinds of models, many of which relate to counter storage solutions, and you may see some more video on that before too much longer. I'll probably have to pull the mat up before I show you these, because this is not working contrast-wise. But let's take a look at War in Europe. This is not an unboxing, so we're not going to go through all the components. I have done another video on War in Europe, so go check that out if you're interested in hearing more about the game. This copy came with a bunch of handmade counters, and I didn't feel like throwing them away. These are the ones that did not fit in the trays. So on the top, I've got the whole big stack of maps, counters, booklets, all this stuff. There's kind of a lot, as you can see. I mean, it's a big game, right? It's one of the classic monsters. Now, inside the box, I have fit everything into what I am going to call the 20 compartment 15mm Cube4Me trays. It is my considered opinion, and I have looked at a lot of the different solutions, that of all of the different companies making or making available counter storage trays at this time, which include GMT, Udogribi Games, Chessex, DVG, and Aegis, I feel like the Cube4Me trays are the best single solution. They are also a little bit expensive, but there's a trick to that, and to save you some money, that you can use in some situations, and I'll show you that toward the end. This has been organized in an extremely conventional way. Counters are organized by nationality and by unit type, and there is no doubling up anywhere of unit types in here. And as you can see, I hope you can see, we can divide each of the Cube4Me compartments, which normally fit, if you look at, say, the stacks of American Air here. I can fit 9 stacks of 11 counters. These are SPI counters, so they're not super duper thick. You can fit 11 in the tray comfortably, and the lid will still close, no problem. Per stack, so that'd be 99 counters, and then as you can see, I got a few extras in on the side. That's probably another 10 or 15 counters. So each compartment will fit a large number of counters. I haven't done much experimenting with these trays with larger counters. These are, of course, half-inch counters, as was traditional back in 1970 whatever when this came out. I have every reason to think that this will work fairly well with larger counters as well. And I have seen some pretty nice solutions on the Cube4Me website. This is not a sponsored video, by the way, but the nice folks at Cube4Me were happy to sell me some trays, and I like them, so here we are. So here we have our Soviets. Here we have various miners. This is the compartment of blank counters that did come with this copy of the game. Here's all the various markers. Again, none of which are... some of the markers are actually doubled up, because I didn't want to eat a whole extra compartment just because I could put, here's the 3 game turn markers. That seemed stupid. Everything else is meticulously organized and highly findable. With the compartment dividers, you probably will need to use tweezers. Certainly, you'll notice also that some of the compartments, like the American air points here, and say the multiple compartments of Soviet rifle divisions, those don't have dividers in them because I was just able to fill the entire compartment up. But my normal rule of thumb in a GMT tray, now this is prior to the miracle of 3D printing, right? Your standard GMT tray, fresh from the factory, is that you could get 2 full counter sheets of half-inch counters into 1 counter tray. That's 560 counters. I think that's a good rule of thumb. Yes, you can absolutely get some more in there, but I think it tops out at adding a 3rd counter sheet to that, which would give you 840 counters per counter tray. I have managed to get all 3,600 counters of War in Europe into 3 Cube4Me trays. So just averaging it all out, that is then 1,200 counters per tray. In part, that's due to the larger capacity of the Cube4Me trays, which I'll give you a comparison in a moment here. In part, that's due to the fact that I was able to subdivide each of the compartments into 2, 3, 4, or 5 separate subcompartments with the 3D printed dividers. So let me wipe all this out and clear the table here, and I'll show you both the... Let's show you the Cube4Me trays first. So in addition to what I just said, there's something you're going to notice. I'm going to pull the lid off the Cube4Me counter trays. The lids, there's a little notch on here that makes the lids snap very firmly on. Unless you filled this with like fishing weights or something like that, I'm confident that this lid will never come off unless you want it to come off. And yet, it is not difficult to remove, at least on this size tray. Now, this is what we would call the closest equivalent to the standard GMT trays. This is 20 compartments, it's 4x5, and the tray itself is 15 millimeters tall, which is the same height when the lid's on as the GMT trays. Now, one thing you'll notice is that the GMT tray has this enormous lip around the outside. Okay, now that is, I'm guessing, that was designed into the GMT tray to enhance stability. And that makes sense. But what it does mean is that there's 3/4 of an inch about border around the outside in which that space is not used, okay? And then we have these fairly narrow dividers between the different compartments, all right? And we've got a pretty gradual curve on the edges as well. I can reliably get 8 stacks of counters in one of these GMT compartments, presuming that we're talking about half-inch counters. It's fair to say that, well, I have plenty of games with larger counters. I have a lot more games with half-inch counters. That's definitely true. Now, on the other hand, on the Cube4Me tray, you'll notice that there's still a rim around the outside, right? And it's not like, I think the plastic's thicker too, certainly than the bottom part of the GMT tray, and I feel like it's a little thicker than the, or roughly the same as the top of the GMT tray. The entire thing is clear, so there's no black bottom. Some people might not like that. I could care less about that. There's a very small lip. Now, what this means is that the overall tray itself is actually a little narrower than the GMT tray. You can see the GMT tray is about 1/2 inch wider this way. The Cube4Me tray is about 1/4 inch longer this way. That does mean that in some game boxes you will have trouble fitting these, but that's true of the GMT trays as well. In particular, the Decision Games flat boxes, such as is found in the Gauss games or Axis Empire's Ultimate Edition, these will not fit this way in the box. You'll have to put them this way, matching the rectangularity of the box, which means you can fit less of these. You can't fit 2 stacks of these in the Decision Games flat boxes. Haven't tried them in the multi-man flat boxes or anybody else's flat boxes because it hasn't come up yet. I may try to do Atlantic Wall or another Goss game, and it'll be Atlantic Wall because that's going to be the challenging one because it's by far the largest. I may try and do Atlantic Wall in the Cube4Me trays. Now, the other fascinating and incredibly attractive thing with the Cube4Me trays is that this is, again, the 20 compartment 15 millimeter tray with lid, is that they're available in a variety of other sizes as well. This is, for example, I think it's 8 millimeters tall tray. This is exactly the same, and I think the lids are the same too, as the other one, except that it's narrower. Now this one, I will tell you, is a little bit difficult to get your fat sausagey fingers in there to get the lid off without any pop, but you can do it. It's not too hard. So if you have only like a little bit of space, just not quite enough depth in the box to get counter trays in, boom, here you go. Now, obviously, they're shallower compartments. You can't fit as many counters, but perhaps that's fine. In addition, now this is just what I have. Go look at the Cube4Me website. If you search for Google for Cube4Me counter trays, they'll come up. We've got these 12 compartment 8 millimeter deep trays. And I also found this 25 compartment tray. Now there's a little bit of a gap here between lid and tray, so that's actually pretty easy to get off. And the compartments are pretty small. But the interesting thing with this size is, first of all, it's 25 compartments, which is itself attractive. It's more compartments. The compartments are a little smaller. These trays fit in Avalon Hill and Victory Games boxes with no problems at all. And that is, in fact, why I ordered 12 of them. So we will definitely be leveraging these as we finish up punching, clipping, and organizing the SPI stuff. And start moving on to the old Avalon Hill. Something like Flat Top is still going to be pretty hopeless in this respect, but that's just because Avalon Hill was being stupid and put it in a box that's too small. All right, so I have 3 sets, designed and printed, 3 sets of 3D printed counter dividers. That just occurred to me that this is very close to the color of the backdrop. All right, so for the GMT trays, I have a 2-compartment, a 2-compartment offset, and a 3-compartment. Again, all these models are available in the file repository to patrons at the swordsman level and above. So what this does is this lets me, and I use this a lot with GBACW, so I got one big batch of units and one smaller batch of units. I can put them like this. This way I can get 6 stacks of half-inch counters on one side of the compartment and 2 stacks on the other side. That generally allow me to fit anywhere between 14 and 24 counters in the GMT tray per depth. Or I can split it more or less evenly, 4 stacks and 4 stacks. Or I can split it 3 ways and go 2 stacks, 2 stacks, and 2 stacks. Then that is how this breaks down. Because we are losing a little bit of width for the dividers themselves, so you can actually fit a few less counters in each compartment for the GMT trays. I haven't kind of mathed that out for the Cube4Me trays yet. Now, the Cube4Me trays are arranged similarly, except that this is the equivalent of this divider for the GMT trays. It splits the compartment in 2 parts. However, because of the way the shape of those compartments in the Cube4Me trays, where it's kind of 3 stacks wide instead of 4 stacks wide, you're losing the middle stack. So I think that these dividers to divide the Cube4Me compartments into 2 sections will be more useful, I think, with games with larger counters, like games with 5/8 inch counters in particular. We also have something similar to this. And again, here we can get 6 stacks over here and 3 stacks over here because this is the offset version. Very useful. All 5 of these, yeah, I believe that's true. This one was not used with War in Europe, but the other ones were. We also have a 3-compartment divider to divide the compartment into 3 sections. And I adapted this because, hey, can I do 4 or 5 or even 6? 6 turned out to not work very well in my opinion. So this is the 4-compartment divider, and you can do the orientation either way. You may be able to see that the compartment is not square, it is rectangular. So you can't turn it this way, but you can turn it this way. And I did that with War in Europe again. So here, I can fit 2 stacks, 2 stacks, 2 stacks, and 3 stacks. So this is a meaty compartment. I can get a lot of stacks in here, right? So I even went and designed a 5-compartment divider, which divides that top compartment into 2 sub-compartments. So now I can get 2 stacks, 2 stacks, 2 stacks, 1 stack and some extra counters, 1 stack and some extra counters. So these increase flexibility tremendously. The attempt to do a 6-part divider was based on this one, and I didn't feel like it worked very well. I thought it was too difficult to get the pieces out at the end, and that was basically, you divide it 3 ways, and then again across that way. I didn't feel like that worked particularly well after having tried to print it a couple, tried to use it, and tried to struggled getting the counters out, even with tweezers, frankly. So these have been tremendously useful for games that I've stored in them. The main ones that I've done that with so far have been GBACW games. And when I redo Death Valley, that's a long story that you may have already heard. When I redo Death Valley, which is a hard game to store because it's a lot of stuff, I'm going to use these dividers as well, probably in the GMT trays. Or maybe the Cube4Me trays. We'll see. I may change my mind on that. I also did Axis Empires Ultimate Edition, again, in the GMT trays, with an arrangement very similar to this. And I arranged everything by major power or by minor, and by what card causes the unit to enter play. So there's a lot of different compartments, but each of the individual compartments, each of the individual, like, batches of units aren't necessarily very big. It might be 1 or 2 units. So I was able to get all of Axis Empires Ultimate Edition, I forget how many counter sheets that is, into 4 counter trays, 4 GMT counter trays. I wasn't yet using the Cube4Me trays. So what we've done here then is create a system by which we can take the old SPI trays out of the soap boxes and do whatever we want with them. I'll find a use for them at some point. Even if the lids don't fit on, I can still use those trays while sorting counters, and they are useful for that. Or maybe I'll give them to my wife and have her use them for beads or something like that. But we are now able to get War in Europe done extremely comfortably. There's one more trick I'm going to show you on the Cube4Me trays, by the way. Extremely comfortably. I could probably even get an extra tray in that box. But hey, I don't need to anymore. So that makes me happy. So War in Europe is done. Now, I mentioned earlier that there is a trick that you can leverage to save a little bit of money on the Cube4Me trays, which normally run about $5 a piece. However, that $5 price is both the tray and the lid. It's rather interesting because these are designed in such a way that, and I've seen this done with Pacific War, it may have been Board Games Chronicle that did it this way. You can fill this bottom tray up, skip the lid, and put another tray on top. And as long as the compression in the box is good and you've got a little bit of play there, this does not fit tight, but as long as the compression in the box is good, this ought to all hold together. That won't work for every box, but it may well be useful for some boxes. And you can order the Cube4Me trays without the lids. At least at this point, I'm not doing that. I'm getting the lids with them. At some point, I may order lidless trays. I've also found this 12-compartment tray to be insanely handy. Here's why. You have a game like Empire of the Sun, for example. That's my best example, with 2 huge decks of cards, but not that many counters. There's a counter sheet and a half of counters in Empire of the Sun. You could probably fit all the counters in this small tray. But then if you use a GMT tray that fills the entire box, where do you put the cards, the decks of cards? This solution, and you might even be able to get, this is the 8mm one, you may even be able to get 2 of these in there, and absolutely you could fit Empire of the Sun in 2 of these. Then that lets you put the cards down here, right? Now, more recent editions of Empire of the Sun have had a 3-inch box. That's no longer nearly as much of a problem, but I mean, that was a thing I was struggling with. with the old version of Empire of the Sun, and frankly, that's why I bought the new one. So we've looked at two things here today. Well, three things, because we count War in Europe as one of them. We've taken a look at War in Europe. We have taken a look at the 3D printed compartment dividers for both GMT and Cube4Me trays, and we have taken a look at the Cube4Me trays themselves. There are other configurations of Cube4Me trays. They also sell a bunch of other storage things on their website, so by all means do check that out. And I'll remember to put a link down in the video description to their website, because it's really not hard to find anymore, but it has been hard to find in the past. But I think these are the best trays you can get right now. I like the Aegis trays too, and I will definitely have something to say about the upcoming Aegis magazine storage trays. Those are really cool. But for like the basic counter trays, I think these are the best ones right now. That is my considered opinion. I like the Aegis trays too, but I have less trouble getting the lids off of these. They are available in more different sizes. That is also something Aegis is going to start getting into. But for now, I think the best trays money can buy are the ones from Cube4Me.
Massive thanks to the patrons of Ardwulf's Lair, whose support and encouragement make what we do at Ardwulf's Lair possible. Thank you, patrons. Links to help support the channel are in the video description, so check out the Patreon, the Ko-Fi, and the merch store, where you can get snazzy Ardwulf's Lair t-shirts, drinking vessels, and other cool swag. There is also an affiliate link for Noble Knight Games in the video description. If you buy stuff through that affiliate link, it helps us support the channel with Noble Knight store credit. Thank you, Noble Knight. Until next time, thanks for watching, and happy gaming.